I knew the locks had been changed before I even touched the door. There's a sound a key makes when it no longer belongs somewhere, a dull, unfamiliar resistance, like the house itself is rejecting you. I stood there on the porch key, frozen in my hand, heart pounding, as if the wood behind that door had grown a spine overnight. Somewhere inside, I could hear movement, voices, laughter that didn't belong to me. That was the moment I understood something had already been taken, not just space, not just respect, but the illusion that this place was still mine in any way that mattered. But none of this started that night. My name is Lila Hartman, and I was 21 years old when I realized that family doesn't always break you loudly. Sometimes it does it quietly, one small favor at a time, until you don't recognize your own reflection in the house you grew up in. My mother died when I was 9. Car accident, drunk driver, middle of the afternoon. One minute she was helping me glue photos onto a school project. The next, there were 2 police officers standing at our front door, hats in their hands, eyes already apologizing before their mouths opened. My father never fully recovered from that moment, but he tried, for me. We had good years after that, quiet years, just the 2 of us. He was a man of routines and patience. Black coffee, old jazz records, antique radios he rescued from yard sales like wounded birds. He treated me like I was capable long before the world did, taught me how to wire an outlet before I was 12, told me that most things in life weren't broken beyond repair, people included. Then he got sick. Pancreatic cancer doesn't give you time to prepare your heart. 8 months later, he was gone. I was 16. That was the first time the ground shifted beneath me. The second came a year later, wearing a friendly smile and carrying a casserole dish. Diana had been my mother's friend years ago. I barely remembered her. She started showing up after the funeral, checking in, bringing food, asking if I needed help. At first, I thought it was kindness. I thought wrong. She moved in shortly after my 18th birthday. Just for a few weeks, she said, until I get back on my feet. She brought her son Wyatt with her, 25 years old, built like an athlete ambition, permanently set to idle. He called himself an entrepreneur. What that really meant was he never left the couch. I tried to be civil. I really did. But it's hard to stay polite when someone eats the last of your food blast television at 2 in the morning and smirks every time you remind them whose house they're in. 6 months passed, then 8, then a year. Diana redecorated without asking. Wyatt turned the guest room into a gaming bunker. Utility bills doubled. I worked part-time at a repair shop while studying for my electrical certification. They treated the house like a free resort. The basement became my refuge. Finished walls, a locking door, my father's radios lined like sentinels. I'd sit there in the dark, listening to jazz, crackle through static, pretending he was still upstairs complaining about gas prices. Then one night, Diana sat me down. She smiled the way people do when they think they've already won, folded her hands, adjusted a pillow, and said, "Lila, you're an adult now. It's time we talk about responsibilities." That was when she asked me to pay rent to live in my own father's house. Something inside me went very, very still. I nodded. I agreed. And that night, I locked the basement door, not knowing yet that this was only the beginning. The strange thing about agreeing to something you know is wrong is how quickly the world seems to reward everyone except you for it. After that conversation in the living room, Diana walked around the house like she'd just closed a successful deal. She hummed while making coffee, reorganized cabinets that weren't hers to touch, and started referring to the basement as my little apartment, like it was some generous favor she'd carved out for me, instead of the last corner of the house I could still breathe in. Wyatt took the news as a kind of personal victory. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even acknowledge it directly. He just smirked at me whenever we crossed paths, like I'd finally been put in my place. The rent wasn't even due yet, but the shift was immediate. Suddenly, Diana had opinions about how long my showers were, about how late my lights stayed on, about how much electricity I must be using down there. She started leaving sticky notes on the fridge, passive little reminders written in cheerful handwriting that somehow made them worse. Let's all be mindful of utilities, or shared spaces mean shared responsibility. Wyatt, on the other hand, became bolder, louder. He stopped pretending he respected any boundary at all. His gaming sessions stretched into the early morning hours, explosions, and shouting bleeding through the vents like noise pollution. When I asked him to turn it down, he'd pause the game just long enough to glance at me and say, "Relax. You're not paying for silence. You're paying rent." That word, rent. It sat wrong in my chest every time he said it. I started spending less time upstairs, not because I wanted to, but because it was easier than fighting a battle I was already tired of losing. The basement became more than a refuge, it became a hiding place. I ate down there, studied down there, slept with headphones on so I wouldn't hear Wyatt pacing overhead at 3 in the morning, or Diana's voice drifting down through the floor criticizing something about me to someone on the phone. She talked about me like I wasn't there. She's very sensitive, I heard her say once, laughing softly. Always has been. But she needs to toughen up. The real world doesn't care whose name is on what. That sentence stayed with me. The irony was suffocating. I was the only one paying bills. The trust my father had left covered utilities, taxes, repairs, everything. Diana never contributed a dime. Wyatt couldn't even keep track of his own subscriptions. Yet somehow, in their version of reality, I was the freeloader, the child who needed to be taught responsibility, the girl clinging to something she didn't deserve. The house itself began to feel different. Not hostile, exactly worse than that. Indifferent. Like it had stopped recognizing me as its anchor. The kitchen smelled like Diana's cooking now spices I didn't associate with home. The living room furniture had been rearranged so many times it no longer felt familiar. Even the hallway photographs had shifted. My parents' wedding photo had been moved to a lower shelf, partially hidden behind a framed quote Diana liked about chosen family. I didn't say anything. That was my mistake. Because silence, I learned, doesn't create peace. It creates opportunity. And Diana was very good at spotting opportunity. One afternoon, I came home from work to find strangers in the house. 3 women I'd never met, wine glasses and hand shoes, kicked off by the door like they belonged there. They were laughing in the living room, music playing softly in the background. Diana was holding court in the center of it all, gesturing grandly as she talked. I pulled her aside, keeping my voice low. Hey, next time you want to have people over, can you at least let me know? She stared at me for a second, then laughed, not amused, not kind, dismissive. Oh, Lila, she said, patting my arm like I was a child tugging at her sleeve. Don't be territorial. This is our space now. You can't just claim it like that. Our space. I went back downstairs without another word. That night, I lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to footsteps that didn't feel like family walking above me. I realized then that the rent demand hadn't been the problem. It was just the permission slip. The moment they decided I was no longer the owner of my own life, just another obstacle they could manage. And somewhere in that realization, something began to shift. Quietly, slowly, like pressure building behind a wall. There are moments when anger explodes. Loud, undeniable, impossible to miss. And then there are moments when it doesn't explode at all, when it sinks inward so deeply that you don't even recognize it as anger at first. It feels more like vertigo, like the world has tilted just enough to make you question which way is up. That's how it felt the morning I heard the crash. I was in the basement, sleeves, rolled up hands, deep inside one of my father's old radios. The casing was open wires, exposed tiny brass components spread carefully across the workbench, like organs laid out during surgery. Restoring radios had become my quiet ritual, the one thing that made me feel close to him again. When I focused on the work, everything else faded. Diana's voice, Wyatt's laughter, the tension upstairs. Then something shattered. Not a soft thump, not a muffled drop. A sharp final crack that echoed through the floorboards and punched straight into my chest. Laughter followed. I froze, screwdriver still in my hand, heart already racing, as if it knew. Before I did what I was about to see, I took the stairs 2 at a time. The kitchen was chaos. In the middle of the tile floor lay one of my father's radios, the radio, a 1940s RCA with a walnut casing and golden dials he'd polished by hand, the one he'd taught me to rewire on, the one that had sat in the den my entire childhood like a quiet guardian. Its wooden body was split glass, shattered pieces scattered like bones. Diana stood nearby, holding a broom, her mouth already twisted into a practiced expression of regret. Wyatt was leaning against the counter, laughing openly like this was a punchline he couldn't believe had landed so well. What happened? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry, Diana said quickly. I was rearranging the shelf in the hallway. It just slipped. You moved it, I asked. She nodded, already defensive. I thought it would look better above the dining table, more open. That old thing was taking up space. Wyatt snorted. Relax. It's just junk. You've got 10 more of them downstairs. I stared at him, then at her. That was my dad's, I said quietly. He restored that by hand. He taught me how to fix radios using that one. Diana sighed, actually sighed, like I was exhausting her. Lila, you're being overly sentimental. It's just stuff. You need to learn to let go. Something in my chest cracked in a way I couldn't hear, but I felt it all the same. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I turned around and walked out the front door. I drove until the houses thinned and the road curved toward the overlook at the edge of town. I parked, shut off the engine, and sat there for hours, staring at nothing. My hands were still gripping the old screwdriver I'd been using, the one my father kept next to that radio. I held it like a lifeline. That was when the numbness faded. Not into rage, into clarity. When I came home that night, the radio was gone. Swept up, disposed of, erased. No apology note, no acknowledgement. At dinner, Diana talked about her upcoming vacation plans like nothing had happened. Wyatt asked if I'd seen his charger. That was when I realized I had become invisible, a ghost in my own house. But ghosts, I learned, don't disappear quietly. They linger. They wait. And sometimes they haunt. Upstairs, Diana was already counting down the days to Florida, 7 full days of sun drinks and social media bragging. Wyatt posted stories about finally getting away. They packed openly, loudly, confidently convinced they had won something permanent. I stayed out of sight. Let them forget me. Because while they were planning margaritas and beachfront photos, I was remembering something my father had done years ago, something I hadn't needed to think about until now. Something they never bothered to ask about. And soon they were going to learn exactly what they'd broken. There are secrets that feel heavy because they're dangerous. And then there are secrets that feel heavy because they're quiet, because they've been waiting patiently for the exact moment they're needed. I hadn't thought about the deed in years. My father handled things the way he handled everything else, quietly, carefully, without drama. A few months after my mother died, long before he got sick, he sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of paperwork and a seriousness that made my stomach knot. This isn't because I'm planning on going anywhere, he'd said, tapping the folder with one finger. This is because life doesn't ask permission. He transferred the house into my name when I turned 16. Not publicly, not with announcements or conditions, just a clean legal transfer. A backup plan, he called it. Protection. This way, he'd said, no one can take what's yours. At the time, I barely understood what it meant. I was still grieving, still a kid. The house was just home. It wasn't an asset or leverage, it was where we lived. But sitting in the basement now listening to Wyatt shout at his screen upstairs, and Diana laugh into her phone about vacation plans, I understood exactly what my father had done. The house wasn't just emotionally mine. It was legally mine. Every wall, every floorboard, every lock. And the realization didn't come with anger. It came with a strange, steady calm, like everything suddenly clicking into place. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about protection. About boundaries that had been trampled so thoroughly they needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. So I waited. I let Diana finish packing. Let Wyatt brag about beaches and drinks and resetting his grind. I smiled politely when Diana asked me to water the plants. I nodded when Wyatt joked about me holding down the fort. On the morning they left, I stood in the driveway and waved. Diana wore an oversized sun hat that made her look like she belonged somewhere expensive. Wyatt dragged a squeaky suitcase behind him, grinning like a kid who'd just been let out of school early. Try not to throw a party while we're gone, he called. Basement queen. I gave him a thumbs up. No promises. Their car disappeared down the street, and for the first time in months, the house went silent. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, breathing in the quiet, feeling something unfamiliar spread through my chest. Not triumph, not relief, readiness. That afternoon, I met with my father's lawyer, the same one who'd handled the title transfer years earlier. He didn't seem surprised when I told him why I was there. He pulled the file, laid out the documents, confirmed what I already knew. Everything was airtight. Diana and Wyatt were guests. Long-term guests, yes, but guests all the same. They had no claim, no rights, no leverage. I didn't plan on calling them. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain myself to people who had never asked for my permission in the first place. Instead, I planned carefully. I filed the notice. I scheduled the locksmith. I packed their belongings neatly, respectfully into labeled boxes and stacked them in the garage. I didn't touch anything personal. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about finality. Then I wrote the note. 5 lines, no anger, no insults. Diana, you were right. It's time I stopped living off other people. I've decided to sell the house. You have until Sunday to collect your belongings. Lila. I hadn't actually sold the house. That was the bait. Because what I wanted wasn't just for them to leave. I wanted them to feel the moment everything they'd taken for granted slipped through their fingers. I sealed the envelope, placed it on the counter, and waited. What I didn't expect, what I hadn't planned for, was how quickly they'd come back. 2 days early. And angry. Very, very angry. They came back on a Thursday. I remember because Thursdays had always felt harmless to me, too close to the weekend to be dramatic, too far from Monday to carry dread. I was in the basement on a video call with my mentor from the electrical program, walking through grounding methods and conduit sizing when the first knock hit the door. Not a knock, really. A slam. The kind that rattles the frame and makes your pulse jump before your brain has time to catch up. Then came Diana's voice, sharp and furious, slicing through the floorboards. Lila. Open this door right now. I closed my eyes for a moment, listening. My mentor's voice buzzed faintly through my headphones, asking if everything was okay. I swallowed, removed the headphones, and stood up. This is going to be a productive afternoon, I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. I took the stairs slowly, calmly, the way you do when you've already made peace with the outcome. When I opened the door, I didn't swing it wide, just enough. Diana stood there, gripping her purse like a weapon, sunburn blooming across her cheeks. Her sunglasses were crooked, her smile gone entirely. Wyatt was beside her, jaw clenched, suitcase, tipped over behind him like evidence of a rushed escape. What is this? He snapped, pointing at the lock. Why can't we get in? Diana didn't wait for an answer. You better explain yourself, young lady. Right now. We live here. I tilted my head. I thought you were gone until Sunday. Wyatt's face darkened. You said you sold the house. I said I was going to, I replied evenly. There's a difference. Diana's voice rose. You have no right. This is our home. We pay bills. It's in my name, I cut in. The silence that followed was immediate and thick. Has been since I was 16. I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The lawyer's name is on the notice taped to the garage. You've got until Sunday to collect your things. Wyatt lunged forward. You little... One step closer and I shut the door. Not violently, not dramatically. Just firmly. I slid the deadbolt into place and leaned my forehead against the wood heart, hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, breathing shallow, shaking. I didn't feel victorious. I felt terrified. That night, they didn't leave. Diana slept in the car. Wyatt sprawled on a lawn chair, under the porch light, like he was guarding something that was already gone. I kept the blinds closed and the lights off, listening to their muffled arguments seep into the walls. The next few days were worse. Diana called neighbors, spinning stories about betrayal and forgery. Wyatt shouted insults every time I walked past a window. One neighbor texted me quietly to say, we know who she is. Don't worry. But worry has a way of ignoring reassurance. By Saturday, they were gone. No goodbye, no apology, just tire tracks and silence. I waited until the sound of their car faded completely before I let myself cry, not from regret, but from exhaustion. Because standing up for yourself isn't empowering the way people pretend it is. It's lonely, and it hurts. But when the house finally went quiet, truly quiet, I realized something had shifted back into place. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The silence they left behind didn't feel peaceful at first. It felt wrong, like the ringing in your ears after something loud finally stops. I kept expecting to hear Wyatt's television blast through the vents, or Diana clattering around the kitchen commenting on something that wasn't her business. But the house stayed still. Too still. For the first few days, I moved through it like a guest myself. Every room looked the same, but it felt lighter, as if the walls had exhaled along with me. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd compressed just to survive until I no longer had to. The first thing I did was reclaim the basement. Not hide in it, reclaim it. I used a small portion of the trust my father had left me, careful and deliberate, the way he'd taught me to be. I replaced the old couch that still smelled faintly of stress and sleepless nights. I installed proper lighting, a real workbench, and shelves, sturdy enough to hold every radio I'd been restoring piece by piece. I lined them up like artifacts, not trophies, memories. Each one represented patience, repair, survival. Then I got serious about my future. I stopped dragging my feet with my electrical certification and threw myself into studying. No distractions, no late-night noise, no constant second-guessing. I passed the exams in 2 months flat, no retakes. The internship I'd been half-heartedly juggling turned into something more when I landed a position with a local contracting company that specialized in historical restorations, old buildings, theaters, churches, places that held stories in their walls. It felt right. The owner, Mr. McKinley, was quiet and sharp-eyed, with a voice like gravel and a habit of watching before he spoke. One afternoon, after I stayed late to help fix a panel no one else could figure out, he glanced at me and said, "You ever think about running your own outfit someday?" I laughed it off, but the idea stayed with me. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with the world, calling old friends I'd let drift away, cooking real meals, buying plates that matched. It wasn't some overnight transformation, no dramatic glow-up or sudden confidence, just small, deliberate steps toward feeling like myself again. Then the letter came, a thick envelope, no return address. Inside was a note and a check. It was from Diana. The note was careful, apologetic. She talked about grief, about overstepping, about wanting to make things right. The check was for $1,200, the exact amount she'd demanded in rent. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed, not bitterly, not cruelly, just honestly. I didn't cash the check, but I framed the note. I hung it on the wall above my father's restored RCA radio, the one I'd spent weeks piecing back together from fragments. It wasn't perfect, a little scratched, slightly off-center, but it worked. Just like me. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. I thought closure was something you reached and then kept. I was wrong, because 2 months later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number, and the voice on the other end belonged to Wyatt. I didn't listen to the voicemail right away. There's a special kind of dread that comes with recognizing a voice before it finishes the first sentence. Wyatt's tone slid into my ear like it still belonged there, casual, familiar, entitled, and my thumb hovered over the screen while the notification blinked insistently. Curiosity won. "Hey, Lila, it's me. Don't hang up." I closed my eyes. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't insulting me. That alone made my stomach tighten. People like Wyatt didn't soften unless they needed something. He talked about how things had gone sideways, about family, about not wanting things to end this way. Then came the pivot, the practiced casualness, the fake humility. "I've got a business opportunity, a real one. I just need a little help getting it off the ground." I almost laughed. I didn't respond. I let the silence sit, let it stretch, let it work on him. The second voicemail came a week later, more polished, more sales pitch. The third dropped any pretense and edged toward desperation. The fourth was the one that made me sit up straight. "Look, we're in trouble," he said quietly. "My mom's not doing great. We're staying at this motel and it's draining everything. I'm trying, okay, I just thought maybe you could help, even just a loan." There it was. Not remorse, need. I didn't delete the messages, I saved them. That night, I called Reggie, my father's old friend, a retired detective who now worked as a private investigator. My dad used to call him the bloodhound in a Hawaiian shirt. I'd never asked him for anything before. I met him at a diner on the edge of town. Same cargo shorts, same crooked grin. "What's the job?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I slid my phone across the table. "They're looking for their next victim. I want to make sure it isn't me or anyone else." Reggie nodded once. "Give me a week." While he worked, I kept my life steady. Work, repairs, jazz in the evenings. I didn't tip my hand. I didn't respond to Wyatt. I waited. When Reggie came back, he didn't sit down right away. "You were right," he said, and then some. Wyatt had been busy. He'd used my home address, my address, to register 2 LLCs, one for consulting, one for a drop-shipping wellness brand. Neither profitable, both suspicious. Worse, they were squatting again, living in a rental owned by a retired couple who thought Wyatt was managing repairs. Reggie showed me photos. Wyatt lounging on a porch swing. Diana smoking in the backyard like she'd found another place to settle into. Something in me went cold. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a pattern. And patterns don't stop unless someone interrupts them. So I started making calls. I contacted the homeowners, filed reports, submitted documentation to the state. I didn't rush it. I built it cleanly, carefully, the way my father would have wanted. Then Wyatt left another voicemail. This one was cheerful. "I'm hosting a live webinar next week, totally legit, teaching people how to build income from home. You should watch. Might even use your story as a testimonial." That's when I knew. This wasn't going to end quietly. Stop. Type continue when you're ready for part 8, exposure. Part 8, exposure. There's a moment when someone underestimates you long enough that the balance shifts without them noticing. Wyatt thought he was inviting me to watch him succeed. What he was really doing was giving me a front row seat to his downfall. I reached out to a few local creators who specialized in exposing online scams, the kind who broke down fake gurus and digital freedom schemes frame by frame. One of them recognized Wyatt's tactics immediately: recycled scripts, inflated claims, testimonials bought from actors. They agreed to sit in on his webinar, quietly posing as interested buyers, recording everything. I didn't watch from home. I watched from across the street. Wyatt was streaming live from the living room of the house he and Diana were squatting. In the same rundown rental the retired couple had left unattended for the winter. Through the window, I could see him pacing confidently, headset on, gesturing at a whiteboard filled with buzzwords. Passive income, phone-only hustle, 6 figures from anywhere. Meanwhile, the Bryners, the actual homeowners, were arriving with a locksmith and 2 police officers. Diana answered the door, mid-cigarette confusion, snapping into panic as reality caught up with her. Wyatt's voice was still echoing through the window mid-sentence when the officers stepped inside. Shouting followed, then sirens, then silence. The live stream didn't end on Wyatt's terms. The exposé went live that same night at screenshots, recordings, timelines, every lie laid out cleanly and publicly. Payment processors froze accounts. The state flagged his filings. Both LLCs were revoked pending investigation. I watched from my car as Wyatt and Diana were escorted out with duffel bags, arguing with each other, illusion shattered. Wyatt saw me then. His face changed shock first, then rage. "You set us up," he hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You set yourselves up. I just stopped looking away." One of the officers stepped between us. Wyatt backed off. That should have been the end. But consequences, I learned, have a way of compounding. The last chapter didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived in an envelope. About a month after Wyatt's webinar collapsed in real time, I got a formal letter from the state acknowledging my complaint: misuse of address, fraudulent business filings, false registrations. It was written in careful legal language, but the meaning was simple. They were opening a full investigation. Wyatt had made it easy for them. By using my address for his LLCs, he'd rerouted official correspondence to my house for over a year. Notices he never opened. Deadlines he missed. Penalties that stacked quietly, patiently. Buried in one of those letters was a failure to file notice and a growing tax liability. $14,000 and climbing. The dominoes fell faster after that. Both of Wyatt's LLCs were dissolved. His accounts were frozen. Payment processors flagged his name. The dropshipping site went dark overnight. Every application he submitted after that, grants, loans, even basic merchant services, was quietly denied. Reggie texted me one line: "He's done." I told him that was enough. Diana, however, didn't go down as loudly. She vanished for a while. No calls, no messages, no dramatic exits. I assumed she'd moved on, found another place to land. Then one afternoon, while filing paperwork for my electrician's license at a notary office, I saw her name on the appointment log. Diana Lockhart, power of attorney, reinstatement. I waited in my car and watched her leave the building thinner. Now movements tighter, confidence worn thin at the edges. Still holding herself like she believed control was just one clever move away. A few quiet inquiries later, I learned the truth. She was trying to reinstate power of attorney over a disputed family estate land that wasn't legally hers to sell. Her own relatives had cut her off. She was running out of people to use. I could have let it go. I almost did. But something about the way she kept trying to rewrite herself into positions of trust after what she'd done to my home, to my father's memory, to me, didn't sit right. So I made one last call, not dramatic, not confrontational, just precise. Within weeks, her attempt triggered a full audit. Documents were frozen. Her motion was rejected. Her name added to an ongoing legal dispute she couldn't talk her way out of. That was my final move. I didn't see her again until months later at a small community craft fair. I was helping a friend set up a booth for vintage radio repairs. Jazz hummed softly from a restored speaker. I looked up and saw her across the crowd, standing in line for fried dough. Sunglasses, cheap posture, tired. She saw me too. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Wyatt, from what Reggie told me, moved out of state, tried to restart in Arizona, got caught shoplifting electronics and ended up on probation. His online empire dissolved into a dead channel with 3 views and a comment from a bot. And me, I was doing all right. The house was mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. The basement studio grew into a real side business. People brought me heirlooms they thought were beyond saving. I brought them back to life. My work with McKinley turned into a full-time contract. I started teaching a small restoration class at the community center, teenagers, mostly kids, who'd been told they weren't good at anything. I showed them how to fix broken things, told them what my father told me. Don't throw away what still works. One night after class, I sat alone in the basement, warm, light tools neatly arranged, jazz playing low. I looked around at everything I'd reclaimed: the house, the peace, the person I'd buried just to survive. Was it worth it? Yes, because this was never about revenge. It was about making sure no one could take from me again. I leaned back in my chair and whispered into the quiet, "You were right, Dad. It was mine all along. The house, the strength, every inch of it.